Why did the US dollar start behaving strangely in 1984? Why was there suddenly more physical cash in Miami than in the rest of the country combined? And how could a single organization lose $2 billion a year to rotting cardboard and hungry rats without it ever appearing on a balance sheet? We've been told the story of a drug lord, but we haven't been told the story of the shadow bank that shifted the gravity of global trade. We are looking at a ghost supply of currency so massive it started to rewrite the rules of macroeconomics from the shadows of the jungle. Welcome to the Historical Audit, where we find the missing pieces behind history's greatest events. To understand how one person can warp the prices of goods across the planet, you have to look past the headlines and focus on the sheer weight of the paper. Most people think of wealth as a digital entry or a balance in a high-rise bank. In the 1980s, wealth was a logistical nightmare that required industrial-scale storage. The Medellín Cartel was pulling in approximately $420 million every single week. This wasn't credit. It was physical currency oceans of $20, $50, and $100 bills. This created a mechanical crisis that the world's financial regulators were never designed to manage. They were spending $2,500 every month just on the rubber bands needed to keep the stacks from collapsing. This is where the math of the shadow world collides with the reality of the streets. In a standard economy, the government tracks the movement and volume of currency, but this was a hidden supply. Because the organization could not walk into a standard bank and deposit $400 million, they had to treat cash like a physical commodity. Billions of dollars were stuffed into false walls, buried in plastic drums in the jungle, or left in warehouses where the humidity was as much an enemy as the police. When rats ate an estimated $2 billion of this cash every year, that was a massive, unintentional contraction of the global money supply. It was currency being removed from the world forever. However, the moment the decision was made to move that cash, to build private cities, to purchase thousands of properties, or to fund a private army, it became a massive, unregulated injection of liquidity. This was essentially a shadow authority dumping billions into a system that had no way to account for it. When that much unseen cash hits a market, the price of every single thing it touches starts to warp. It was a private version of quantitative easing, and the shockwaves were felt from the streets of Medellín to the trading floors of Europe. The moment this ghost liquidity hit the Colombian market, it triggered a lethal phenomenon that economists call Dutch disease. Traditionally, this happens when a nation discovers a massive natural resource, like oil, and exports so much of it that their currency value skyrockets. This makes their other exports, like coffee, flowers, or textiles, too expensive for the rest of the world to buy, effectively killing the domestic industry. In the 80s, cocaine was the oil. The cartel was flooding the country with US dollars at a rate the local economy couldn't absorb. As these dollars were converted into local currency to pay for land and labor, the value of the peso began to decouple from the actual productivity of the nation. There was a desperate need to transform this dirty paper into something usable, leading to the creation of the San Andresitos. These were massive, unregulated markets filled with smuggled electronics, luxury cars, and designer clothing. You could buy a high-end television in Medellín for 40% less than the price of the same unit in New York. The reason was simple. The goods weren't there to generate a profit. They were there to turn those dollars into clean local currency. This created an inflationary time bomb. Legitimate merchants who played by the rules and paid their taxes could not compete with these discounted prices. They went bankrupt by the thousands, hollowing out the middle class. Meanwhile, the sheer volume of cash circulating in the city meant that the price of land and housing entered a state of hyperinflation. Real estate prices didn't just rise, they entered orbit. A simple home in a working-class neighborhood would suddenly be sold for 10 or 20 times its actual value just because a lieutenant needed a place to hide a drum of cash. This didn't just make the cartel rich, it made the basic cost of living for every ordinary citizen impossible. This narco-inflation was a silent tax on the poor that no government had authorized, and it destroyed the stability of the nation for a generation. The reach of this shadow economy extended far beyond the Andes. By the mid-1980s, the United States Federal Reserve began to notice a massive mechanical failure in their own currency flow. The Miami branch of the Federal Reserve suddenly reported a cash surplus of $5 billion, a figure that was higher than the rest of the country combined. The money was literally flowing back into the system faster than the government could track it, yet at the same time, there were mysterious shortages of physical bills in other parts of the country. The organization was effectively siphoning the physical liquidity out of the American heartland. While the US government was trying to manage inflation through interest rates and traditional policy, they were ignoring the fact that billions of dollars were being packed into crates and flown south to the Caribbean. This created a shadow currency market. These dollars held outside the American banking system became a global force, often referred to as eurodollars. They were unregulated, untracked, and incredibly powerful. To manage this global flow, they utilized the Bank of Credit and Commerce International. This was the ultimate dark hub, an institution that allowed the movement of money into the legitimate banking systems of London, Luxembourg, and the Middle East. When those billions hit the BCCI, they were mixed with legitimate corporate profits and oil revenue. This dark liquidity helped fuel the global credit boom of the 1980s. The soaring stock markets and the luxury real estate bubbles in major global cities were being greased by the very money the government was spending billions of dollars to stop. The global inflation rate of that decade carried the invisible signature of the drug trade, as blood-soaked cash was transformed into the clean liquidity that powered the Western world's growth. The most effective weapon used by the cartel wasn't the car bomb or the rifle. It was the ability to use inflation as a tool of social engineering. The construction of a neighborhood for thousands of people living in the Medellín slums, providing them with homes, schools, and soccer fields, is often cited as a work of a Robin Hood. But when we look at the actual records of this era, it becomes clear that this wasn't an act of charity. It was a calculated cost of doing business designed to secure a supply of labor. By destroying the legitimate Colombian economy through narco-inflation, it became impossible for the poor to survive on a normal, government-regulated wage. The organization effectively broke their legs by driving up the price of basic necessities like bread and rent with those massive, unrecorded cash injections. Once the population was desperate, they stepped in as the savior by offering narco wages. They created a market where they were the only buyer for human life and loyalty. Recruits were being paid more for a single day's work than they could earn in 10 years of legitimate farming. This wasn't a gift. It was a closed loop of dependency. The inflation created by the cartel was used to force the population into their service. They weren't just giving back to the community. They were buying the state and the society one desperate citizen at a time. The inflation of the 80s was the anesthetic that allowed for a hostile takeover of the social contract. The government's role was replaced by a private power, using a currency that was rapidly losing value for everyone except those who were on the payroll. As we move into 2026, the spirit of this shadow economy has found a new home in the digital architecture of the world. We no longer see the rubber band budgets because the shadow money of the 21st century no longer has physical weight. We have moved into the era of digital liquidity, but the mechanical logic remains identical to what was perfected in Medellín. The new hiding places are no longer holes in the jungle floor. They are encrypted wallets and privacy, focused digital assets that exist entirely outside the review of any central bank. This represents a new ghost supply of money, a massive, untracked reservoir of wealth held by cybercriminals, sanctioned states, and shadow oligarchs. This untracked wealth is creating a shadow inflation that official government reports simply cannot see. Just as the BCCI functioned as the laundromat for those billions in the 80s, the modern world now relies on digital mixers and dark pools that move trillions of dollars across borders in a heartbeat. This is the dark liquidity that fuels the everything bubble. It is the reason why, despite historic interest rate hikes intended to cool the economy, the prices of scarce assets, whether it's high-end real estate in Dubai or decentralized digital coins, refuse to settle. The dollars that once distorted the Miami real estate market in 1985 have simply evolved into the shadow bites that are distorting global asset prices today. We are even seeing the return of the state as a cartel. Nations today are increasingly acting like that organization from Colombia, printing massive volumes of their own paper to subsidize their populations and buy political loyalty, all while the resulting inflation destroys the value of the citizens' actual work. They are using the same logic of breaking legs and selling crutches, causing the economic crisis through debasement, and then presenting themselves as the only source of relief. Money is not a static tool. It is a volatile energy. If you inject $25 billion of unchecked power into a system, that system will warp and stretch until the very concept of value begins to tear. This history proves that the global economy is not a series of isolated nations, but a single, interconnected bloodstream. When one part of that stream is poisoned with blood liquidity, the entire body develops a fever. The story was never just about the violence, it was about the math. When you realize that global prosperity was once partially funded by the inventory loss of a man with too many rubber bands, you start to see the cracks in the official narrative. The red ink in these records is still wet. This story is the missing piece that explains why our current financial systems feel so unstable. It shows that when the illusion of value is controlled by those outside the law, everyone pays the price through the hidden tax of inflation. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe, share with your friends, and join the audit.